The last light of day bled across the horizon, painting the New Jersey shoreline in shades of dying amber and bruised purple. The beach was nearly empty now. A few seagulls circled overhead, their cries swallowed by the endless rhythm of waves crashing against sand. Marcus Blackwood sat alone. His Italian leather shoes were ruined, half buried in wet sand. His tailored suit jacket lay crumpled beside him like a discarded skin. None of it mattered anymore. Nothing did. 3 of his men were dead, shot execution style in a warehouse that should have been secure. The ambush had been surgical, precise, and impossible without inside information. Someone in his organization had betrayed him, someone he trusted. And Victor Castellano, the snake who had been circling his territory for months, was tightening the noose with every passing hour. Marcus stared at the ocean, watching wave after wave crash and retreat, endless, meaningless. For 15 years, he had built an empire from nothing. He had clawed his way up from the streets of Newark, survived 3 assassination attempts, buried more enemies than he could count. He had become the most powerful man on the East Coast's underground. And now, at 37, he was watching it all crumble. His phone had stopped buzzing an hour ago. Either his remaining lieutenants had given up trying to reach him, or they were already making deals with Castellano. Both possibilities felt equally likely. Marcus closed his eyes. The weight in his chest had become unbearable. Not grief exactly. Something deeper, emptier. The kind of exhaustion that made a man consider whether continuing to breathe was worth the effort. He had a gun in his car. The thought arrived uninvited but familiar. "Can I sit here with you for a while?" Marcus turned his head slowly. A little girl stood a few feet away on the sand. She looked about 6 years old, with long black hair that the ocean breeze kept pushing across her face. Her skin was fair, her eyes dark and curious. In her small hands, she clutched a red plastic bucket filled with seashells. She was looking at him the way children looked at interesting rocks or unusual birds, with simple, uncomplicated curiosity. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. When was the last time anyone had approached him without fear, without wanting something? He gave a slow, tired shake of his head. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "I'd like to be alone right now. I just need some quiet time." The girl nodded politely. "Okay." Marcus expected her to walk away. Children usually fled from him, sensing something dangerous the way small animals sensed predators. But instead, she stepped a little closer, and then, with careful deliberation, she sat down in the sand beside him. She left a respectful distance between them, about 3 feet of space. She placed her bucket down gently, and then she looked out toward the ocean, exactly as he had been doing, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Marcus stared at her. "You heard what I said, right?" "I did," she replied simply. She didn't look at him. She just sat there, her small feet swinging lightly against the sand, her eyes fixed on the endless water. Marcus Blackwood, the man who commanded fear from hardened criminals, who had made grown men weep with a single glance, found himself completely at a loss. For the first time in more years than he could remember, someone was sitting beside him who wasn't afraid, who didn't want money, or power, or protection, or revenge. She just sat there, and somehow, impossibly, the weight in his chest grew just a little bit lighter. The silence stretched between them, filled only by the whisper of waves and the distant cry of gulls. Marcus watched the girl from the corner of his eye, waiting for her to grow uncomfortable, to fidget, to leave. She did none of those things. She simply sat there, patient as stone, her small hands resting on her knees as she gazed out at the darkening water. Finally, Marcus spoke. "Why didn't you leave when I asked?" The girl turned her head slightly, considering the question with a seriousness that seemed far too old for her young face. "My mom says when someone feels really sad, it helps if they're not alone." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "I'm not sad." "Yes, you are." She said it without accusation, without judgment, just simple fact. "Your eyes look like my mom's eyes after Daddy went away." The words landed somewhere deep in Marcus's chest, in a place he had long ago learned to wall off. He rubbed his hands together slowly, sand grating between his palms. "I appreciate that," he said carefully. "But I'm not very good company today." "That's okay." The girl swung her feet lightly in the sand. "You still look like someone who shouldn't sit alone." Marcus had no response to that. In his world, people said what they thought you wanted to hear. They calculated every word for advantage. This child spoke with a directness that left him defenseless. She reached for her red bucket and carefully tipped its contents onto the sand between them. A small pile of seashells scattered across the surface, white and pink and pale gray, worn smooth by the ocean's patient hands. She began arranging them with careful precision, pressing each one into the damp sand. Marcus watched her work for a long moment. "What are you making?" "A house," she replied without looking up. "A house?" She nodded, placing a curved white shell at what appeared to be the entrance. "For the ocean." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "For the ocean?" "Yes." She said it as if it made perfect sense, as if everyone should know this. Sometimes the ocean gets lonely too. It's so big, and it doesn't have anywhere to rest. So I'm building it a little house where it can feel safe. Something cracked inside Marcus's chest. He stared at the tiny structure forming in the sand. A handful of shells, a child's imagination. A house for the ocean because it might be lonely. When was the last time he had thought about loneliness as something to be cured rather than endured? When had he stopped believing that small gestures could matter? The girl leaned forward and traced a small path in the sand with her finger, a walkway leading from the shell house toward the water. "There," she said softly. "Now the ocean knows it has a friend." Marcus felt something warm and unfamiliar rise in his throat. He swallowed hard against it. For 15 years, he had built empires of money and fear. He had constructed walls so high that no one could reach him. And here was this child, building a house of shells for an ocean she believed could feel alone. For the first time in more years than he could count, Marcus felt something begin to thaw in the frozen core of his chest, not because of strength or power or victory, but because of the fragile, ridiculous, beautiful faith of a little girl who believed that even the ocean needed someone to care. The shell house grew slowly between them, each piece placed with deliberate care. Marcus found himself watching the girl's small hands work, mesmerized by her concentration, by the simple purity of her purpose. She pressed another shell into place, then looked up at him suddenly. Her dark eyes held his without flinching. "Why are you sad?" The question hit Marcus like a bullet he hadn't seen coming. Direct, unavoidable. He looked away, back toward the horizon where the sun was now just a thin line of fire. "That's a long story," he said quietly. "You're too young to understand." The girl considered this for a moment, tilting her head the way a bird might. Then she nodded slowly. "That's true," she admitted. "I don't understand lots of things yet." Marcus almost smiled at her honesty. "But I can still listen," she continued. Her voice was gentle, almost sing-song, like she was repeating something she had heard many times before. "My mom says when people talk about sad things, the sadness gets lighter, like taking heavy stuff out of your backpack. If you carry it alone, your shoulders hurt. But if someone helps you hold it, even just for a little while, it doesn't feel so heavy anymore." Marcus stared at her. In 37 years, through all the violence and betrayal and calculated cruelty of his world, no one had ever offered him something so simple and so profound. He found himself asking a question before he could stop it. "Why do you want to comfort a stranger? You don't even know who I am. You don't know anything about me." The girl looked at him for a long moment, her young face serious with thought. Then she shrugged in the simple, honest way only children could. "I know you're sad," she said. Marcus blinked. "That's enough." She nodded to herself, confirming her own logic. "My mom says when someone is hurting, it doesn't matter if they're a stranger. Hurting is hurting. And anyway," she picked up another shell, turning it over in her small fingers. "Sometimes strangers need kindness the most, because strangers don't have anyone else." The words pierced something deep inside Marcus. He tried to remember the last time someone had spoken to him without wanting something, without calculating angles, without fear or greed or ambition coloring every syllable. He searched his memory and found nothing. Only transaction. Only strategy. Only the endless chess game of power. A sudden image surfaced unbidden from somewhere he had buried long ago. A beach. Different from this one. Warmer, a pink plastic shovel, small hands patting sand into shape. His sister, Maria, 8 years old, kneeling beside him in the summer sun, her dark hair wild with salt and wind. She was explaining why their sandcastle needed a door. "So everyone can come back home," she had said, pressing a shell into the archway. "Even if they go away for a while, the door means they're always welcome." Maria, who had laughed like music, who had believed in doors and homecomings and the goodness of the world. Maria, who had died in his arms 15 years ago, caught in crossfire meant for him, blood soaking into sand not so different from this. The memory struck so sharply that Marcus had to look away. His eyes burned. He pressed one hand against them, feeling moisture he hadn't allowed himself in over a decade. The little girl beside him said nothing. She simply continued building her house of shells, humming softly, giving him space to feel whatever he needed to feel. And somehow, that silence was the kindest thing anyone had offered him in years. A gentle wave rolled toward the shore, touching the edge of the small shell path before retreating back into the endless ocean. The sky had deepened to violet now, the first stars beginning to pierce through the fading light. "Lily," the call came from farther up the beach, a woman's voice carrying notes of worry and relief in equal measure. The girl turned quickly, her face brightening. "I'm here, Mom." Marcus wiped the corner of his eye with the back of his hand. A quick, almost unconscious gesture. He hadn't realized he had been crying. The knowledge unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. A woman walked toward them from the boardwalk path. She moved with calm alertness, the careful posture of a parent who had been watching from a distance, assessing the situation before approaching. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the tired but determined expression of someone who carried too much weight on her shoulders. She was young, perhaps mid-30s, with the same delicate features as her daughter, but there was something else in her face, a shadow behind her eyes, the kind that came from loss worn too long. Sophie Chen reached them and placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder, her gaze moving quickly between her daughter and the stranger beside her. "I hope she wasn't bothering you," Sophie said, her voice carrying an apologetic smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "She has a habit of making friends with everyone she meets." Marcus looked down at the tiny shell house in the sand, then he shook his head slowly. "Actually," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "she helped more than she knows." Sophie's eyebrows rose slightly. Surprised by the answer, Lily beamed with pride, tugging at her mother's hand. "Mom, we're building a house for the ocean, because sometimes it gets lonely too. And Mr." She paused, realizing she didn't know his name. She looked up at him expectantly. Marcus hesitated. In his world, names were currency, names were weapons, names were chains that connected you to consequences. But looking at this child who had given him kindness without asking anything in return, he found himself unable to lie. "Marcus," he said quietly. "Marcus Blackwood." Sophie extended her hand with practiced politeness. "I'm Sophie Chen, and you've already met my daughter." Marcus shook her hand. Her grip was firm despite her slight frame, a survivor's grip. Something flickered across Sophie's face when she heard his last name. Not recognition exactly, more like a distant echo, a half-remembered warning. The name Blackwood meant something to her, though she couldn't quite place why. The moment passed quickly. She smiled again, this time more genuinely. "We should head home," Sophie said, glancing at the darkening sky. "It's getting late, and someone has school tomorrow." Lily pouted but didn't argue. She began gathering her bucket, then paused. She looked at Marcus with sudden intensity. "Wait," she said. Before he could react, she pressed something small and smooth into his palm. A perfect white shell, curved like a crescent moon. "For when you feel sad again," Lily said seriously, "you can hold it, and remember that the ocean has a friend now. And so do you." Marcus stared at the shell in his hand. Sophie watched the exchange with quiet curiosity, something softening in her guarded expression. "Say goodbye, Lily." "Goodbye, Mr. Marcus." The girl waved with both hands. "Don't be sad anymore, okay?" They walked away together up the path, Lily's red bucket swinging at her side, her small hand clasped in her mother's. Marcus remained standing there for a long moment, the shell pressed against his palm. Then, slowly, he slipped it into his breast pocket, right against his heart. The warehouse in Newark looked abandoned from the outside. Rusted, corrugated walls, broken windows covered with black plastic, a faded sign advertising a shipping company that had never existed. Inside, it was a different world entirely. Marcus stepped through the reinforced steel door into a space that hummed with controlled tension. Banks of monitors lined one wall, displaying surveillance feeds from across the city. Armed men moved with quiet efficiency, their eyes tracking their boss as he entered. Thomas Reeves was waiting. Tommy had been with Marcus for 12 years, ever since his discharge from Special Forces with a shattered knee and nowhere to go. He was 45 now, silver threading through his close-cropped hair, but his eyes remained sharp as broken glass. He was the only man Marcus trusted completely. Tonight, those eyes held nothing but bad news. "It's confirmed," Tommy said without preamble. "The ambush was an inside job. Someone fed Castellano our route, our timing, everything. Whoever it is, they're close. Inner circle close." Marcus said nothing. He walked past the monitors, past the men who straightened at his approach, toward the private office at the back of the warehouse. Tommy followed, continuing his report. "Castellano's making moves. He took the Harbor District this morning. 2 of our distribution points went dark an hour ago. And... He hesitated. Marcus stopped at the office door. And? Vincenzo called. Then Marchetti, both asking questions about our position, about our strength. Tommy's jaw tightened. They're smelling blood, Marcus. The wolves are circling. Inside the office, 6 men sat around a scarred wooden table. The Leadership Council. Men who had sworn loyalty and blood. Men who controlled territories worth millions. Men who now looked at Marcus with something he hadn't seen in years. Doubt. The meeting was brief and brutal. Damage assessment, resource allocation, defensive positions. Marcus spoke with cold precision, issuing orders that would slow the bleeding but not stop it. Everyone knew the truth that hung unspoken in the air. They were losing. When the room finally cleared, Marcus stood alone by the window, staring out at the Newark skyline. The city lights blurred and sharpened with each slow breath. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, expecting another report, another casualty, another defection. Instead, he found a message from an unknown number. No sender ID, no trace. Chen didn't die in an accident. Ask his wife about the USB. Marcus read it twice, 3 times. Chen. The name meant nothing to him. He turned to Tommy, who had remained by the door. Find out who Chen is. Now. Tommy's fingers moved across his tablet with practiced speed. 30 seconds of silence. Then he looked up, his expression shifting to something Marcus couldn't quite read. David Chen, Tommy said slowly. 36 years old. Worked as a financial accountant for Castellano's real estate company. Died 8 months ago in a single-car accident on Route 78. Late night. No witnesses. Ruled as driver fatigue. Marcus felt ice forming in his veins. And? Tommy's eyes met his. He had a wife, Sophie Chen, 34. And a daughter. He paused. Lily, 6 years old. The world contracted. Marcus reached into his breast pocket and pulled out the small white shell. It sat in his palm, smooth and perfect, still warm from resting against his chest. For when you feel sad again. Sophie Chen, Lily Chen, the woman with shadows in her eyes. The girl who built houses for lonely oceans. The widow and daughter of a dead man who had known something dangerous enough to get him killed. Marcus closed his fingers around the shell. The universe, it seemed, had a terrible sense of humor. The office fell silent, except for the low hum of electronics and the distant rumble of trucks passing on the highway outside. Marcus stood motionless, the shell still pressed into his palm, his mind racing through possibilities. I want everything on David Chen, he said quietly. Every detail, every connection, every trace he left behind. Tommy hesitated. Marcus, we've got Castellano breathing down our necks. 3 men dead. A traitor somewhere in our ranks. Is this really the time to... No one else knows about this. Marcus turned, his eyes hard. Not the council, not anyone. Just you and me. Understood? Tommy held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Understood. For the next 2 hours, they dug. David Chen's life unfolded across Tommy's screen in cold digital fragments. Born in San Francisco to immigrant parents. Graduated with top honors from UC Berkeley with a degree in accounting. Married Sophie Lin 7 years ago. Daughter born 1 year later. Clean record. No criminal history. No debts. No vices. The perfect invisible man. He had worked for Castellano's real estate development company for 4 years. Started as a junior accountant. Rose quickly. Gained access to financial records that most employees never saw. Then, 8 months ago, everything ended. Tommy pulled up the accident report. Route 78, eastbound. 11:47 p.m. Single vehicle. Chen's Honda Accord had drifted across 2 lanes before breaking through a guardrail and plunging 40 feet into a ravine. No skid marks. No evidence of mechanical failure. No witnesses. The official conclusion was driver fatigue. Marcus read the report twice, his expression unchanging. Convenient. It gets better. Tommy's fingers moved across the keyboard. 3 days before the accident, Chen made a phone call, 47 minutes long. To who? Tommy turned the screen so Marcus could see. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Newark Field Office. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus understood immediately. David Chen had discovered something inside Castellano's operation. Something dangerous enough to make him reach out to the FBI. Something worth killing to protect. And 3 days later, he was dead. Whistleblower, Marcus said softly. Has to be. Tommy leaned back in his chair. Chen found something, tried to do the right thing, and Castellano made sure he never got the chance to talk. Marcus walked to the window, looking out at the night. His reflection stared back at him, ghost-like against the darkness. The USB. Someone believed it still existed. Someone believed Sophie might have it, which meant Sophie and Lily were in danger, perhaps had been in danger all along. "What do you want to do?" Tommy asked. Marcus thought about the logical answer, the strategic answer. Use the information, find the USB, leverage whatever Chen had discovered against Castellano. But that wasn't what surfaced in his mind. Instead, he saw a little girl pressing a shell into his hand, her dark eyes serious and trusting, her voice soft with impossible kindness. Sometimes strangers need kindness the most. She had saved him tonight without knowing it, had pulled him back from an edge he hadn't admitted he was standing on, and now her life might depend on a dead man's secrets. Marcus turned from the window. "We protect them." Tommy blinked. "What?" "Sophie and Lily Chen. We protect them. Starting now." "Marcus." Tommy stood, his voice careful. "You're talking about going against Castellano directly. For people we just met. For a USB we don't even know exists. I know exactly what I'm talking about." Tommy studied him for a long moment, searching for something in his boss's face. Whatever he found made him exhale slowly. "This isn't about the USB, is it?" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out the white shell. It caught the light, smooth and pale as moonlight. "No," he said quietly. "It isn't." He made a silent promise to a girl who believed oceans could be lonely. He would not let her become another casualty in a war she never chose. 63 floors above Manhattan, Victor Castellano stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, watching the city sparkle beneath him like a kingdom of captured stars. He was 52 years old, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that cost more than most people earned in a month. His face carried the distinguished handsomeness of old money and older power. To the public, he was Victor Castellano, real estate developer, philanthropist, patron of the arts. To those who knew the truth, he was something far darker. The door behind him opened without a knock. Only one person had that privilege. "We have a problem." Castellano didn't turn. His reflection in the glass showed no reaction. "Speak." Marco Benedetti, his head of security, stepped forward. He was a thick man with scarred knuckles and eyes that had seen too much to ever be surprised. Tonight, those eyes carried concern. Someone's been digging into the Chen matter. Now Castellano turned, slowly. His expression remained pleasant, almost serene, but something cold moved behind his eyes. "I thought that problem was resolved. The accident was clean," Benedetti said quickly. "No traces, no witnesses. But someone accessed Chen's phone records yesterday. Deep access. Professional level. Who? We're still tracking it down. Could be FBI follow-up, could be private." Benedetti paused. "Could be Blackwood." Castellano's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He walked to his desk, a massive slab of polished mahogany that had once belonged to a European prince. His fingers brushed across its surface as memory pulled him backward. David Chen, the quiet accountant with the unremarkable face and the remarkable attention to detail. Castellano had hired him precisely because he was thorough, meticulous, the kind of man who caught discrepancies others missed. What a terrible miscalculation that had been. Chen had discovered the money laundering first. Millions flowing through shell companies, construction permits, phantom developments. That alone would have been manageable. Embarrassing, perhaps. Expensive, certainly. But survivable. But Chen hadn't stopped there. He had found the other records. The shipments that weren't building materials. The containers that held human cargo instead of steel and concrete. Women from Eastern Europe. Children from Southeast Asia. The trade that generated more profit than all of Castellano's legitimate businesses combined. That discovery could not be survived. "The USB," Castellano said softly. "We never found it." Benedetti shook his head. "We searched Chen's office, his car, his home. Nothing. If he made copies, he hid them well. His wife, Sophie Chen, lives in a small apartment in Jersey City, works 2 jobs, keeps to herself. Our surveillance found nothing suspicious. But she might have it." Castellano's voice was silk over steel. "Or she might know where it is. It's possible." Castellano moved to a smaller table near the window. On it sat a thin folder containing surveillance photographs. He opened it slowly, spreading the images across the surface. Sophie Chen at a coffee shop. Sophie Chen walking to work. Sophie Chen picking up her daughter from school. And there, in the final photograph, a little girl with long dark hair and bright eyes, clutching a red plastic bucket. Lily Chen. Castellano studied the image for a long moment, The girl was laughing at something outside the frame. Pure joy, pure innocence. Increased surveillance on the wife, he said finally. If she has anything, if she knows anything, I want to know first. And if she becomes a liability. He let the sentence hang. Benedetti nodded. Understood. And Blackwood, double the pressure. Hit his remaining operations. Make him bleed. Keep him so busy fighting fires that he has no time to play detective. Castellano smiled coldly. By the time he realizes what's happening, there won't be anything left to find. Benedetti turned to leave, then stopped at the door. What about the girl? Castellano looked back at the photograph of Lily Chen. That innocent smile, those trusting eyes. He picked up the image, holding it delicately between his manicured fingers. Such a shame, he said, his voice absent of any warmth. She really is a lovely child. He set the photograph down and turned back to his window, to his kingdom of lights. Behind him, the little girl's frozen smile remained on his desk, waiting. 3 days passed like slow poison. Marcus spent them putting out fires across his territory, while Tommy quietly gathered every scrap of information about the Chen family. Castellano's attacks came relentlessly now, probing for weakness, testing defenses. 2 more men were lost. Another shipment intercepted. The noose continued to tighten, but Marcus kept returning to the folder on his desk. Sophie Chen's schedule, her routines, the small coffee shop where she took her breaks between shifts at the hotel where she worked as a housekeeper. On the 4th morning, he went. The cafe was a modest place tucked between a laundromat and a nail salon in Jersey City. Chipped formica tables, faded photographs of Italian countryside on the walls, the smell of burnt coffee and old grease hanging in the air. Sophie sat alone at a corner table, both hands wrapped around a paper cup. She wore a plain blue uniform, her hair pulled back in the same simple ponytail. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. The weight of exhaustion pressed visibly on her shoulders. Marcus ordered a black coffee he didn't want and walked toward her table. Sophie? She looked up, startled. Recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion, then something that almost resembled relief. Mr. Blackwood? She straightened in her seat. What are you doing here? I was in the area. The lie came easily. Everything else felt harder. Mind if I sit? Sophie hesitated for just a moment, then gestured to the empty chair across from her. Please. Marcus sat, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent light. The shadows under her eyes were deeper than they had been on the beach, the lines around her mouth more pronounced. This was a woman running on empty, surviving through sheer will. How are you? He asked. Sophie laughed softly, a sound without joy. Surviving. She took a sip of her coffee. Lily hasn't stopped talking about you, by the way. The man on the beach who helped build the Ocean's house. Something warm flickered in Marcus's chest. She's a special kid. She is. Sophie's eyes softened momentarily. Then the weight returned. She keeps asking when we can go back to the beach. I keep telling her soon. She looked down at her cup. I'm not sure I believe it anymore. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Is everything okay? I don't mean to pry, but... He let the question hang. Sophie's hands tightened around her cup. For a long moment, she said nothing. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. We're managing. But her eyes said something different. Her eyes spoke of sleepless nights and unpaid bills, and a fear she couldn't name. Her eyes held the haunted look of someone waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white card. No name, no title, just a phone number handwritten in black ink. He slid it across the table. If you ever need anything, he said quietly. Anything at all. Call this number, day or night. Sophie stared at the card like it might bite her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she picked it up. Why? She asked. Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Marcus thought of a little girl who had sat beside a broken man and offered him kindness without reason. Maybe that's exactly why, he said. He stood, leaving his untouched coffee on the table. Take care of yourself, Sophie. And take care of Lily. He walked out of the cafe without looking back, but as he stepped onto the sidewalk, his trained eyes caught something wrong. A black sedan parked across the street. Tinted windows. Engine idling. It had been there when he arrived. It was still there now. And the driver's attention was fixed not on Marcus, but on the cafe window where Sophie still sat, turning the white card over in her trembling hands. Marcus felt ice spread through his veins. Castellano's men had found her first. The apartment was dark when Sophie unlocked the front door. She paused on the threshold, one hand still on the knob. Something felt wrong. The air carried a different weight, a different silence. "Stay behind me, baby," she whispered to Lily, who clutched her hand with sleepy fingers. Sophie reached inside and flipped the light switch. Her heart stopped. The living room had been torn apart, couch cushions slashed and scattered, books swept from shelves, drawers pulled out and overturned, their contents spilled across the floor like entrails. The small television lay face down, its screen shattered. Family photographs had been ripped from the walls, frames broken, glass glittering on the carpet like frozen tears. Lily's grip tightened. "Mommy?" Sophie pulled her daughter close, her body shaking. She stumbled through the destruction toward the bedrooms, already knowing what she would find. The same devastation. Mattresses overturned, closets emptied, every drawer, every cabinet, every hiding place violated, but nothing was missing. The small jewelry box David had given her on their anniversary sat untouched on the dresser. Her emergency cash remained hidden in the false bottom of the laundry basket. Even Lily's piggy bank stood intact on its shelf. They hadn't come to steal. They had come to send a message. Sophie's legs gave out. She sank to the floor in the doorway of Lily's ransacked room, pulling her daughter into her lap, fighting to breathe through the terror closing around her throat. She called the police. They came. They took notes. They looked around with bored eyes and said things like probably kids and no sign of forced entry and will file a report. They left. The lock on the door remained unbroken. Whoever had done this had walked in like they owned the place. Sophie sat on the ruined couch, Lily pressed against her side. The clock on the wall showed past midnight. Neither of them could sleep. Neither of them tried. "Mommy?" Lily's voice was small but steady in the darkness. "Yes, baby?" "They're looking for the thing Daddy left, aren't they?" Sophie's blood turned to ice. She pulled back, staring at her daughter's face. "What did you say?" Lily's eyes were old in that moment, far too old for 6 years. "Daddy told me a secret," she said softly, "before he went away. He said there were bad people who might come looking for something. He said I had to keep it safe. He made me promise." Sophie's hands trembled as she cupped her daughter's face. "Lily, baby, what did Daddy give you?" Lily hesitated, chewing her lower lip the way she did when she was thinking hard. "He said only give it to good people. People who want to do the right thing." She paused. "He said if bad things happened, I should find someone good to help us." Tears spilled down Sophie's cheeks. All these months, her daughter had been carrying a weight Sophie never knew existed, a secret from a dead man, a burden no child should bear. She pulled Lily tight against her chest, sobbing into her daughter's hair. "I'm sorry, baby. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know." Lily's small arms wrapped around her mother's neck, holding on with surprising strength. "It's okay, Mommy," she whispered. "Daddy said you didn't know because he wanted to keep us safe." They sat in the wreckage of their home, holding each other in the dark. After a long time, Lily spoke again. Her voice was quiet, thoughtful. "Mr. Marcus looked really sad on the beach, but he's not a bad person, is he, Mommy?" Sophie's breath caught. She thought of the man with the haunted eyes who had sat in the sand with her daughter, the man who had appeared at the cafe like a ghost, the man who had given her a card with nothing but a phone number and said call if you need anything. She reached into her pocket and pulled out her wallet. The white card was still there, tucked behind her driver's license. Just a number, no name, no explanation. But something in those few minutes at the cafe had felt different. He had looked at her not with pity or agenda, but with something that almost resembled understanding. For the first time since David's death, Sophie considered reaching out to a stranger, because right now, strangers were all she had left. The phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Marcus was not asleep. He had stopped sleeping properly years ago, and tonight the weight of everything pressed too heavily for even the pretense of rest. He sat in the darkness of his apartment, a glass of untouched whiskey on the table beside him, staring at the New York skyline through rain-streaked windows. The number on the screen was unknown, but somehow, he already knew. "Hello?" Silence. Then a breath. Shaky, uneven. "Mr. Blackwood?" The voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know who else to call." Marcus sat up straight, every nerve suddenly alert. "Sophie?" "Yes." Another trembling breath. "I'm sorry. I know it's late. I know you don't really know us. But something happened and I didn't know what to do," and Lily said, her voice cracked. "I'm sorry. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have, Sophie." His voice was calm, steady, the voice he used when everything was falling apart and someone needed an anchor. "Tell me what happened." The story came out in fragments. The destroyed apartment, the violation of their sanctuary, the police who shrugged and left, the terrifying realization that whoever had come was not interested in stealing. They were searching, I don't understand what's happening, Sophie said, her voice breaking. David never told me anything. He got scared near the end, stopped sleeping, checked the locks 5 times before bed, and then he was gone, and I thought maybe I was imagining things. But now, where are you right now? Marcus interrupted gently. A friend's apartment, a woman from work. But she's scared too. I can't stay here long. I can't put her in danger. I can't, Sophie. Listen to me. Marcus was already on his feet, pulling on his jacket. I'm going to send someone to pick you up. His name is Tommy. You can trust him. He'll bring you somewhere safe. Silence on the other end. Then, why? Why what? Why are you helping us? Sophie's voice was small, exhausted, confused. You don't know us. You don't owe us anything. Why would you do this? Marcus paused at the door, his hand on the knob. Rain streaked the windows like tears. He thought of Lily on the beach, carefully building a house for the ocean, her small hands pressing shells into sand, her dark eyes looking at him without fear or judgment. Sometimes strangers need kindness the most, because your daughter helped me when I needed it most, he said quietly, and I don't forget that kind of thing. Sophie said nothing, but he could hear her crying softly through the phone. Give me the address, Marcus continued. Tommy will be there in 30 minutes. Pack light, just the essentials. And Sophie? Yes, you did the right thing calling me. The line went dead. Marcus lowered the phone and found Tommy standing in the doorway, already dressed, already armed. The man slept even less than Marcus did. I heard, Tommy said. His expression was unreadable. The Chen woman. Get her and the girl. Bring them to the Greenfield safe house. Full security protocol. Tommy didn't move immediately. He stood there, studying Marcus with eyes that had seen too many wars, made too many calculations. You know what this means? He said finally. It wasn't a question. Yes. The moment we take them in, we're at war with Castellano. Open war. Not territorial disputes. Not business conflicts. Tommy's voice was flat. He'll come at us with everything. And we're already bleeding. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. I know. Is a woman and a little girl worth dying for? Marcus thought about that. Thought about the shell in his pocket. The small voice that had asked if she could sit beside a stranger. The child who believed even oceans deserved kindness. Maybe not, he said quietly. But being the kind of man who abandons them isn't worth living for. Tommy held his stare for a long moment, then something shifted in his expression. Something that might have been respect. 30 minutes, he said. And he was gone. The safe house sat at the end of a quiet street in the suburbs of northern New Jersey, surrounded by tall oaks and unremarkable neighbors who minded their own business. From the outside, it looked like any other colonial-style home. White siding, green shutters, a basketball hoop in the driveway. Inside, it was a fortress. Reinforced walls, bulletproof windows, surveillance cameras covering every angle, a basement filled with supplies that could sustain a small army for weeks. Marcus arrived 20 minutes after Tommy's call confirmed the package was secure. He stepped through the front door and found himself immediately frozen in place. Mr. Marcus! Lily launched herself across the living room like a small missile, wrapping her arms around his legs with surprising strength, her face tilted up toward his, beaming with pure, uncomplicated joy. You came. I knew you would come. I told Mommy you would help us. Marcus stood rigid for a moment, unprepared for the assault of warmth. In his world, people did not embrace him. They feared him. They respected him. They bowed or backed away or calculated their next move. No one had hugged him in 15 years. Slowly, carefully, he placed one hand on Lily's head. Her hair was soft beneath his fingers. Of course I came, he heard himself say, and then something happened that made Tommy nearly drop his coffee. Marcus smiled. It was small, barely a curve of the lips, but it was real. The first genuine smile to cross his face in longer than he could remember. Sophie stood by the window, watching the exchange with an expression caught between gratitude and wariness. She looked exhausted, dark circles bruising the skin beneath her eyes. Her arms were wrapped around herself as if she was holding pieces together through sheer will. Thank you, she said quietly, for everything, but I still don't understand why you're doing this. Marcus gently detached Lily from his legs and guided her toward the couch. Then he turned to Sophie, his expression serious. Your husband worked for a man named Victor Castellano, he said. A very dangerous man. I believe David discovered something he wasn't supposed to see, and I believe that's why he's dead. Sophie's face went pale. David never told me anything about his work. She trailed off, her voice breaking. He just got more and more afraid. He stopped sleeping. He checked the locks constantly. He made me promise that if anything happened to him, I would take Lily and run. But you didn't run. Where would I go? Sophie's laugh was bitter, hollow. I have no family, no money, no skills beyond cleaning hotel rooms. I thought if I stayed quiet, kept my head down, whoever killed him would forget about us. They didn't forget, Marcus said gently. They're looking for something David hid. He paused, watching her carefully. Do you know anything about a USB drive? Sophie shook her head slowly. David never mentioned anything like that. I went through all his things after the funeral. His laptop, his files, everything. There was nothing. I know where it is. The voice was small but steady. Everyone turned. Lily sat on the couch, her legs dangling above the floor, her dark eyes moving from her mother to Marcus with an expression far too old for her years. Sophie's breath caught. Lily? Baby, what are you talking about? The room fell absolutely silent. Lily's small hands clasped together in her lap. She looked down at them for a moment, as if gathering courage. Then she raised her head and met Marcus's gaze directly. Daddy gave me something to keep safe, she said quietly. He made me promise not to tell anyone. He said bad people might come looking for it. He said I had to be brave and keep the secret until I found a good person. Sophie pressed a hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her cheeks. Lily continued, her voice growing stronger. Daddy said only give it to someone who really wants to do the right thing, someone who won't be scared of the bad people. She stood up from the couch and walked slowly toward Marcus. She stopped directly in front of him, tilting her head back to look up at his face. Do you want to do the right thing, Mr. Marcus? The question hung in the air like a held breath. Marcus Blackwood, who had done terrible things in his life, who had built an empire on fear and violence, who had long ago stopped believing in concepts like right and wrong, looked into the eyes of a 6-year-old girl, and found himself unable to lie. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Marcus lowered himself slowly until his knees touched the floor. His eyes came level with Lily's, meeting her gaze without looking down, without towering over her. Equal to equal. I want to do the right thing, he said quietly. But I also need you to trust me. Can you do that? Lily studied his face with an intensity that made Marcus feel strangely exposed. Those dark eyes moved across his features, searching for something only she knew how to find. Daddy said I would know, she said softly. He said good people have sad eyes because they've seen too much, but they keep trying anyway. She looked at Marcus for another long moment. You have sad eyes, Mr. Marcus, but you helped build a house for the ocean. She turned and walked to the corner of the room where Tommy had set down their hastily packed belongings. Her small hands rummaged through her backpack, past wrinkled clothes and a worn coloring book, until she found what she was looking for. A teddy bear. It was old and clearly well loved. The brown fur had faded to a soft tan. One button eye was slightly loose. The stitching along one arm showed signs of careful repair. This was a bear that had been held through nightmares, whispered secrets too, carried across miles of uncertain journey. Mr. Bear, Lily said, hugging it briefly against her chest. Then she looked up at her mother. I'm sorry, Mommy. Daddy said not to tell anyone. Not even you. He said it was the only way to keep us safe. Sophie's hand pressed harder against her mouth, tears flowing freely now. Lily turned the bear over in her hands. Her small fingers found a seam along its back, carefully pulled threads that had been designed to look unbroken. She reached inside and withdrew a small plastic bag, sealed tight. Inside the bag was a USB drive, black, ordinary, the kind sold in any electronics store, and yet the weight of it seemed to fill the entire room. Daddy gave it to me on my birthday, Lily said quietly. He said Mr. Bear would keep it safe, and he made me promise. If bad people ever came, I should find a good person and give it to them. She walked toward Marcus and placed the plastic bag in his open palm. I think you're a good person, she said simply, even if you don't think so yourself. Marcus stared at the USB drive. Such a small thing, light as a feather, yet he held it as carefully as a live grenade. Sophie crossed the room and dropped to her knees beside her daughter, pulling Lily into a fierce embrace. I didn't know, she sobbed. David, why didn't you tell me? I didn't know. Lily wrapped her arms around her mother's neck. It's okay, Mommy. Daddy said you didn't know because he loved us. He said the less we knew, the safer we would be. Marcus stood slowly, the USB still resting in his palm. He looked at Tommy, who had already produced a laptop from his bag. Let's see what David Chen died for. Tommy took the drive carefully, inserted it into the laptop, and turned the screen so they could all see. Hundreds of files filled the directory, spreadsheets with columns of numbers, email chains between executives, financial records from shell companies, photographs of shipping containers and warehouse facilities, diagrams showing money flowing through a labyrinth of fake businesses, and video files, dozens of them. Tommy clicked on the first one. The screen filled with the image of a man. He looked to be in his mid-30s, with tired eyes and several days of stubble shadowing his jaw. The room behind him was dark, lit only by the glow of the computer screen. Sophie made a sound like a wounded animal. "David Chen, if you're watching this," he said, his voice hoarse with exhaustion and fear, "then I'm probably dead." He paused, running a hand through disheveled hair. "My name is David Chen. For the past 4 years, I've worked as a financial accountant for Castellano Development Corporation, and I've discovered something that I cannot stay silent about any longer." He leaned closer to the camera, his eyes haunted but determined. "Victor Castellano is not just laundering money. He's running one of the largest human trafficking operations on the East Coast. Women, children, treated like cargo, sold like merchandise." David Chen's voice cracked. "And I have the proof to bring him down." The night stretched into eternity. Sophie had taken Lily to one of the bedrooms hours ago, the little girl finally surrendering to exhaustion after the chaos of the past 24 hours. But in the living room, the work continued. Marcus and Tommy sat side by side, the laptop screen casting pale light across their grim faces as they navigated through the labyrinth of David Chen's evidence. File after file, spreadsheet after spreadsheet, video after video. The picture that emerged was worse than anything Marcus had imagined. Victor Castellano's real estate empire was a mask. Behind the luxury condominiums and waterfront developments lay something far darker. Shipping containers arriving at private ports along the coast. Manifests listing construction materials that weighed exactly as much as human bodies. Shell companies in Delaware and Nevada that existed only to move money in circles until its origins became untraceable. And the victims. Women from Thailand, Vietnam, the Philippines. Girls barely older than Lily from Ukraine and Moldova. Families who had paid everything they had for the promise of a better life in America, only to find themselves trapped in a nightmare of forced labor and worse. David Chen had documented it all with the meticulous precision of an accountant. Bank transfers traced through 6 countries. Photographs of shipping containers modified to hold people. Recorded conversations between Castellano's lieutenants discussing product and inventory and damaged goods. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of millions of dollars laundered. Thousands of lives destroyed. And it had been happening for years. At 4 a.m., Marcus pushed back from the table and walked to the sliding glass door that led to the small balcony. He stepped outside into the cold night air, his breath forming clouds that dissolved into darkness. The stars were invisible here, drowned by the ambient light of civilization. The world looked peaceful from this height. Quiet, ordinary. A lie. Tommy appeared beside him, leaning against the railing. For a long moment, neither man spoke. "What are you going to do with this?" Tommy finally asked. Marcus stared into the darkness. In his 37 years, he had done terrible things. He had hurt people, killed people, built an empire on fear and violence, and the willingness to cross lines others wouldn't. But there were lines even he had never crossed. Women, children, innocents who had no part in the games of powerful men. He thought of Lily, asleep in the next room, clutching her teddy bear. The teddy bear that had held a dead man's final act of courage. He thought of the girls in those photographs, the ones with empty eyes and broken spirits, girls who had been someone's daughter once, someone's Lily. "I've done things," Marcus said quietly. "Things that would make most men sick. I've never pretended to be good." He turned to face Tommy, and his eyes were harder than Tommy had ever seen them. "But this?" Marcus's voice dropped to something cold and absolute. "Children sold like cattle, families destroyed for profit. This is something else. This is a line that men like me exist to hold." Tommy nodded slowly. "So what's the play? We hit his operations? Take out his lieutenants?" "No." Marcus turned back to face the night. A bullet would be mercy. Prison might even make him a martyr to his people. His hands gripped the railing, knuckles whitening. Castellano doesn't deserve mercy. He deserves to watch everything he built collapse around him. He deserves to see his name become poison. His fortune seized, his allies abandon him, his legacy reduced to ashes. He turned, and the look on his face made Tommy take an involuntary step back. "He doesn't die by my hand," Marcus said. "He dies by the truth, by David Chen's truth, by the evidence a dead man spent 2 years collecting." His voice dropped to a whisper made of ice. I'm going to destroy Victor Castellano, and I'm going to make sure the whole world watches him fall. Dawn had barely broken when Marcus assembled his inner circle. Only 4 men sat around the table in the safe house basement: Tommy Reeves, Vincent Caruso, who had run Marcus's operations in Brooklyn for 15 years, Daniel Ortiz, former NYPD detective turned security specialist, and James Webb, the only man Marcus trusted with technology and information. These were the men who had proven their loyalty and blood, the ones who would die before they betrayed. Marcus stood at the head of the table, the USB drive resting in front of him like a loaded weapon. 2 objectives, he said, both non-negotiable. He held up one finger. First, Sophie and Lily Chen remain protected at all costs. I don't care what resources it takes. I don't care what it costs. They survive this. He raised a second finger. Second, this evidence reaches the right hands. Not just any hands. The right ones. People who can't be bought. People Castellano hasn't corrupted. Vincent leaned forward, his scarred face troubled. The FBI? You're talking about handing ammunition to the feds? Marcus. They'll use it against all of us eventually. Probably, Marcus agreed. But some things matter more than survival. The room fell silent. Tommy spoke next, his voice pragmatic. The problem is Castellano's reach. He's got people inside federal agencies. Judges, prosecutors, hell, probably senators too. We hand this to the wrong person, it disappears. And we disappear with it. Marcus nodded. He had considered this, which is why we need someone clean. Someone with a personal reason to want Castellano destroyed. He looked at Webb. Agent Sarah Mitchell. Newark Field Office. What do we know? Webb typed rapidly on his laptop. 41 years old. 15 years with the Bureau. Specialized in organized crime and trafficking cases. Her sister was a victim of a trafficking ring in 2015. Never recovered. Mitchell's been hunting operations like Castellano's ever since. And her file? Clean. Obsessively clean. She's been passed over for promotion twice because she refuses to play politics. Webb looked up. If anyone at the FBI is incorruptible, it's her. Marcus reached for the burner phone on the table. Then she's our contact. He dialed a number from memory. It rang 3 times before a sharp female voice answered. Mitchell. Agent Mitchell. Don't hang up. I have something you need. A pause. Who is this? Someone who's about to hand you Victor Castellano on a silver platter. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm listening. A dead accountant named David Chen spent 2 years documenting Castellano's human trafficking operation. Bank records, shipping manifests, recorded conversations, enough evidence to bury him for 100 lifetimes. Mitchell's voice went very quiet. Where did you get this? That doesn't matter. What matters is, I'm willing to give it to you, but I have conditions. What conditions? Marcus looked toward the stairs that led to the upper floor. Somewhere above him, Lily Chen was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her father's courage was about to reshape the world. 2 people need protection. Witness protection. The real kind. Before any arrests are made. Before any announcements. They disappear first, or the evidence disappears forever. Silence stretched across the line. You're Blackwood, aren't you? Mitchell's voice carried neither fear nor accusation. Just recognition. Does it matter? It might. Another pause. Why? Why would someone like you help bring down someone like Castellano? Marcus watched the first rays of sunlight filter through the basement window, because someone reminded me that sometimes strangers need kindness the most. Mitchell said nothing for a long moment. Then, I'll need to verify the evidence. If it's real, I'll make sure your conditions are met. Personally, it's real. And Mitchell, move fast. Castellano already knows something's wrong. He ended the call. Across the city, in a penthouse 63 floors above Manhattan, Victor Castellano's phone rang. He listened without expression as his lieutenant delivered the report. Blackwood had taken the Chen woman and her daughter. They had been moved to a secure location, and there were rumors that someone was shopping evidence to federal contacts. For the first time in years, something cracked behind Castellano's careful mask. His hand tightened around the phone until the plastic groaned. "End this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tonight, everyone involved. No witnesses. No survivors." He paused. Especially the child. The first gunshot shattered the silence at 3:07 a.m. Marcus was already moving. He had felt the wrongness in the air 15 minutes earlier. That instinct born from decades of surviving when others didn't. The perimeter cameras had flickered. A car had passed too slowly. Small signs that screamed danger to those who knew how to listen. Sophie and Lily were gone, evacuated through the back entrance into a waiting vehicle driven by Vincent Caruso. They had a 3-minute head start. It wasn't much. It would have to be enough. The front windows exploded inward as automatic weapons fire raked across the living room. Glass and wood splinters filled the air like deadly confetti. Marcus dove behind the reinforced kitchen island, his own weapon already in his hand. "Tommy, east side!" he shouted over the chaos. Tommy was already there, returning fire through the shattered remains of a window. 3 men in black tactical gear were advancing across the front lawn. 2 more came around the side of the house. Professional, coordinated. Castellano had sent his best. The house became a war zone. Muzzle flashes lit the darkness like lightning. Bullets punched through walls and furniture. The smell of cordite and blood filled the air. Marcus moved through the chaos with lethal precision, dropping one attacker, then another. But they kept coming, wave after wave. Castellano wasn't taking chances tonight. A cry of pain cut through the gunfire. "Tommy." Marcus turned to see his oldest friend stumble backward, hand pressed against his side where crimson was rapidly spreading across his shirt. "I'm fine," Tommy shouted, still firing with his other hand. "Keep them busy. The car needs more time." Marcus grabbed the radio from his belt, switching to the evacuation channel as he ducked behind an overturned couch. Bullets tore through the cushions inches from his head. "Vincent, status." Static, then Vincent's voice, strained but steady. 2 miles out. Clear road. They're safe, Marcus. Relief flooded through him, followed immediately by cold resolve. He pressed the radio again, switching to a different frequency. "Lily, can you hear me?" A pause, then a small voice, trembling but present. "Mr. Marcus, listen to me carefully, sweetheart." Marcus fired twice over the couch, heard a body fall. "Remember what you taught me on the beach? Remember the shell house? The Ocean's house?" "Yes." Another burst of gunfire. Glass shattered somewhere behind him. "Sometimes the waves knock it down." "But what did you tell me?" The line crackled. When Lily's voice returned, it was stronger, steadier. "We build it again. That's right." Marcus felt something warm spread through his chest despite the chaos. "No matter what happens tonight, remember that. We always build again. I'll remember." Lily's voice wavered slightly. "But you have to remember too, Mr. Marcus. Promise me." Marcus closed his eyes for just a moment. In the darkness behind his lids, he saw a little girl pressing shells into sand, building a home for a lonely ocean. "I promise." He dropped the radio and rose from cover, firing in one fluid motion. 2 more attackers fell, but there were always more. Always more shadows pouring through the broken windows and splintered doors. Something punched through his left shoulder. The impact spun him sideways, sent him crashing against the wall. He looked down and saw blood, his blood soaking rapidly through his shirt. Tommy was down now, propped against the kitchen counter, still firing but fading fast. They were surrounded, outgunned, out of time. Marcus pressed his back against the wall, blood dripping from his fingertips, and smiled. Sophie and Lily were safe. The evidence was on its way to Mitchell. Castellano's empire would fall even if Marcus didn't live to see it. He raised his weapon with his good arm. "All right, Castellano," he whispered through gritted teeth. "My turn." And he stepped back into the fire. Agent Sarah Mitchell sat alone in her office at the Newark field station, the glow of her computer screen the only light in the room. The USB drive had arrived an hour ago, delivered by a man who said nothing and left before she could ask questions. Now David Chen's face filled her monitor, and his voice filled the silence like a ghost demanding justice. "My name is David Chen. I'm recording this because I don't know how much time I have left." Sarah leaned closer, her heart pounding against her ribs. On screen, David looked exhausted, hunted, but his voice remained steady as he walked through the evidence he had spent 2 years collecting. Bank accounts in the Cayman Islands, shipping routes from Southeast Asia, names, dates, dollar amounts, shell companies that existed only on paper, photographs of containers modified to transport human cargo. And at the center of it all, Victor Castellano. "He's not just laundering money," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "He's selling people. Women, children, families who trusted that America would give them a better life." He paused, swallowing hard. "I have a daughter. Her name is Lily. She's 6 years old. When I look at those manifests, when I see the ages listed, some of them are younger than her." Sarah felt tears burning in her eyes. She thought of her own sister, lost to traffickers 8 years ago, never recovered, never the same. "If you're watching this, I'm probably dead," David continued. "But Lily is still alive. My wife is still alive, and they deserve to live in a world where men like Castellano face consequences." The video ended, Sarah sat motionless for a long moment. Then she reached for her phone and dialed her supervisor's direct line. 30 minutes later, she knew she had made a mistake. The warrant request was denied. Insufficient verification of evidence. Concerns about chain of custody. Orders to stand down until a full review could be completed. The words were bureaucratic, but Sarah had been in the bureau long enough to recognize their true meaning. Someone had made a call. Someone on Castellano's payroll. She checked her watch. 4:15 a.m. If Castellano had been warned, he would already be moving. Private jets, hidden accounts, a dozen countries without extradition treaties. By morning, he would be a ghost. Sarah Mitchell had spent 15 years following rules, trusting systems, believing that justice would prevail if she just did her job well enough. Tonight, she was done waiting. She grabbed her service weapon, her badge, and the USB drive. She walked out of the building alone. 3 miles away, Marcus Blackwood crawled through a drainage tunnel beneath the safe house. His shoulder screamed with every movement. Blood loss had made him dizzy, weak. Tommy was behind him, barely conscious, supported by Daniel Ortiz, who had appeared through the chaos at the last moment. They emerged into a construction site, where a black SUV waited with the engine running. "You need a hospital," Ortiz said. Later, Marcus climbed into the driver's seat, fighting through the pain. "I know where Castellano will go. Private airfield in Teterboro. He's got a jet fueled and ready for exactly this situation. You can barely stand." Marcus turned the key. The engine roared to life. "Then I'll do this sitting down." Across the river, Victor Castellano climbed the stairs of his Gulfstream G650. His penthouse was burning. His accounts were being frozen. His lieutenants were scattering like rats. But he had planned for this. Money hidden in places no one would ever find. A new identity waiting in Montenegro. He had survived worse. He would survive this. He paused at the top of the stairs, looking back at the Manhattan skyline one final time. "Mr. Castellano?" The pilot appeared in the doorway. "We're cleared for takeoff." Castellano smiled coldly. "Then let's fly." 3 paths converged through the darkness. Sarah Mitchell, racing against a corrupted system. Marcus Blackwood, bleeding and broken but refusing to stop. And Victor Castellano, ascending into his private jet, absolutely certain he had won. The clock read 5 a.m. Dawn was coming. The first light of dawn painted the sky in shades of blood and gold as Marcus's SUV crashed through the security gate of Teterboro Private Airfield. He drove straight onto the runway, tires screaming against asphalt, and slammed to a stop directly in the path of the Gulfstream that was beginning to taxi toward takeoff position. The jet's engines whined and died. Marcus stepped out of the vehicle, his left arm hanging useless at his side, blood still seeping through the makeshift bandage wrapped around his shoulder. His right hand held his weapon steady, aimed at the aircraft's door. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the jet's door opened. Victor Castellano descended the stairs with the calm of a man who had never been denied anything in his life. His silver hair was immaculate, his suit was pressed, only his eyes betrayed the fury beneath the polished surface. 4 bodyguards flanked him, weapons drawn, forming a protective semicircle. Castellano stopped at the bottom of the stairs, surveying Marcus with something between amusement and contempt. "Blackwood." He shook his head slowly. "I should have known. All of this chaos, all of this destruction." He gestured at Marcus's wounded shoulder. "For what? A woman and her brat?" Marcus didn't move. His weapon remained trained on Castellano's chest. "Not for them," he said quietly. "For David Chen. For every child you shipped across the ocean like cargo. For every family you destroyed. For every life you sold." Castellano laughed. The sound was cold, empty, devoid of humanity. How touching. The great Marcus Blackwood, finding his conscience at the end. He took a step forward, his bodyguards matching his movement. "Do you think this makes you righteous? You've killed more men than I have. You've built your empire on the same blood and bones. You're no different from me." "Maybe not," Marcus admitted. His voice was steady despite the weakness spreading through his body. "I've done terrible things. I've never pretended to be good." He raised his weapon slightly higher. "But there are lines, Castellano. Lines that exist even in the darkness. Children, innocents, people who never asked to be part of our world." His eyes hardened to ice. "You crossed every one of them, and someone had to stop you." Castellano's smile vanished. "You can't stop me, Blackwood. You're bleeding out on a runway with no backup, no allies, nothing but delusions of morality." He nodded to his men. "Kill him." The bodyguards raised their weapons. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. and then the world exploded with light and sound. Sirens, dozens of them. Black SUVs poured onto the runway from every direction, surrounding the jet, surrounding Castellano, surrounding everyone. Doors flew open and agents in tactical gear spilled out, weapons raised, voices shouting commands. FBI! Everyone on the ground. Now! A black sedan screeched to a halt near Marcus. Sarah Mitchell stepped out, badge held high, her eyes locked on Castellano with 15 years of rage burning behind them. Victor Castellano. Her voice cut through the chaos. You're under arrest for human trafficking, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit murder. Get on your knees. Now. Castellano's composure finally cracked. He spun in a wild circle, seeing agents everywhere, his bodyguards already dropping their weapons and raising their hands. The calculating eyes that had manipulated so many people searched desperately for an escape that didn't exist. He looked like exactly what he was, a trapped animal. Marcus lowered his weapon slowly. The metal felt impossibly heavy in his hand. Sarah Mitchell approached him, her expression unreadable. You look terrible, Blackwood. Feel worse. She studied him for a moment. You could have killed him. Why didn't you? Marcus watched as agents forced Castellano to his knees, cuffed his hands behind his back, began reading him his rights. Because a bullet was too easy, he said quietly, and because someone reminded me that there's more than one way to build justice. He thought of Lily, safe somewhere with her mother, of David Chen, who had died trying to do the right thing, of a shell house on a beach, waiting for the ocean to come home. For the first time in his life, Marcus Blackwood stepped aside and let the light do its work. The morning sun rose over Teterboro Airfield as Victor Castellano knelt on the cold asphalt, his hands cuffed behind his back, his $1 million Gulfstream gleaming uselessly behind him. An FBI agent stood over him, voice flat and official. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney. Castellano's eyes had gone empty. The calculating intelligence that had built an empire of shadows had finally hit a wall it couldn't buy, threaten, or manipulate its way through. By noon, the story had exploded across every news network in the country. Breaking news. Real estate mogul Victor Castellano arrested in massive human trafficking bust. FBI raids reveal shocking extent of criminal empire hidden behind legitimate business. Dozens arrested as authorities dismantle international trafficking ring. David Chen's video testimony played on every channel, his tired face, his haunted eyes, his voice steady with the courage of a man who knew he might not survive but spoke anyway. The public watched a dead man become a hero. Comments flooded social media. Vigils were organized. David Chen's name trended worldwide. People who had never known him wept for his sacrifice, celebrated his bravery, demanded justice for his family. Sophie and Lily were moved to an undisclosed location the same day. Witness protection, new identities, a chance to start over far from the shadows that had consumed their lives. Agent Sarah Mitchell handled the arrangements personally. She also handled the questions about Marcus Blackwood. He wasn't there, she told her superiors. Anonymous tip led us to the airfield. That's all I know. The lie was small. The debt was enormous. Marcus refused all credit, refused all acknowledgement. When reporters started sniffing around stories of a mysterious figure who had helped bring Castellano down, they found nothing but dead ends and closed doors. Some men wanted fame. Marcus Blackwood wanted to remain exactly what he had always been, a shadow. 3 days later, he lay in a private hospital room, overlooking the Manhattan skyline. The bullet had been removed from his shoulder. The doctors said he was lucky, a few inches to the right and he would have bled out on that runway. Lucky. Marcus almost laughed at the word. Tommy was recovering in a room down the hall. The others had scattered back to their territories, their lives, their own versions of normal. The war with Castellano was over. And somehow, against all odds, Marcus had survived. He stared out the window at the city he had spent his life conquering. The buildings looked different now. Smaller somehow, less important. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. A nurse entered, carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. This arrived for you, Mr. Blackwood. No return address. She placed it on the bedside table and left. Marcus stared at the package for a long moment. Then, slowly, he reached for it with his good hand. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in crayon, a child's drawing. The image showed a beach, blue waves, yellow sand, a small structure made of circles that might have been shells, standing proudly near the water's edge. And beside the shell house, 2 figures, one tall, one small, sitting together, looking out at the sea. At the bottom, in careful, wobbly letters. "Thank you, Mr. Marcus," from Lily. Below that, in slightly neater handwriting that must have been Sophie's, "You gave us back our lives. We will never forget." Marcus held the drawing against his chest, and for the second time in 15 years, he let himself cry. 2 weeks later, Marcus Blackwood sat on the same stretch of sand where everything had begun. The New Jersey shoreline stretched endless before him, painted in the soft gold and amber of approaching sunset. Waves rolled in with their eternal rhythm, whispering secrets to the shore before retreating back into the vast blue. His shoulder still ached beneath the bandages hidden under his shirt. The doctors had told him to rest. He had never been good at following orders, but this time, he wasn't here because he was broken. He was here because he was waiting. The beach was quieter than before. A few joggers in the distance. A couple walking hand in hand near the water's edge. Seagulls circling overhead, crying their lonely songs to the fading sky. Marcus closed his eyes and breathed in the salt air. For the first time in longer than he could remember, the weight in his chest felt manageable. Not gone entirely. Perhaps it never would be. But lighter somehow. Shared. "Mr. Marcus." His eyes snapped open. A small figure was running toward him across the sand, dark hair flying behind her, a red plastic bucket swinging wildly at her side. Lily Chen. She crashed into him with the full force of a 6-year-old's enthusiasm, wrapping her arms around his neck without hesitation, without fear, without any of the careful distance that most people kept from Marcus Blackwood. "I knew you'd be here," she exclaimed, pulling back to look at his face with shining eyes. "I told Mommy you'd come back to our beach. I knew it." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something warm, something he had forgotten he was capable of feeling. "You were right," he said softly. "I came back." Lily grinned and plopped down beside him in the sand, exactly as she had done that first evening, as if 8 months of grief and danger and chaos had never happened, as if they were simply old friends reuniting in their favorite place. Sophie approached more slowly, her steps careful in the soft sand. She looked different than before. The shadows under her eyes had faded, the tension in her shoulders had eased. She wore a simple sundress, and her hair fell loose around her face. She was smiling. "She's been counting the days," Sophie said, stopping a few feet away. "Ever since Agent Mitchell told us it was safe to come back." Marcus nodded. Mitchell's good at keeping promises. Sophie's eyes held his for a moment, communicating everything that words couldn't capture. Gratitude, understanding, the shared knowledge of how close they had all come to losing everything. Lily was already emptying her bucket onto the sand. Shells of every size and color scattered between them, collected from wherever the witness protection program had temporarily housed them. "The old house got washed away," Lily announced matter-of-factly. "But that's okay. I'm going to build a new one. Bigger this time. Stronger." She began arranging shells with focused determination, her small tongue poking out slightly as she concentrated. Marcus watched her for a moment. Then he reached down and picked up a pale pink shell. "Where does this one go?" Lily's face lit up. "Right there. That's the front wall." He pressed it carefully into the sand where she pointed. Together, they worked in comfortable silence, shell by shell, piece by piece, a new house taking shape where the old one had been destroyed. Sophie stood watching them, her hand pressed against her heart. Then she stepped forward and sat down on the other side of Lily. "Room for one more?" she asked softly. Lily beamed. "Mommy, you can do the roof." Sophie picked up a shell, turned it over in her fingers, and placed it gently atop the growing structure. The three of them sat there as the sun sank lower toward the horizon, a man who had built empires of shadow, a woman who had lost everything and found the courage to start again, and a little girl who believed that oceans could be lonely and strangers could be friends. For the first time in a very long while, something that felt like family took shape on that quiet beach, building something new from the pieces of what had been broken. The shell house stood complete, as the last rays of sunlight painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. It was larger than the first one Lily had built all those weeks ago, more elaborate, a proper doorway made of curved white shells, a winding path of smaller pieces leading from the entrance toward the water, walls reinforced with layers of pink and gray, built to withstand whatever the ocean might bring. Lily sat back on her heels and tilted her head, examining their creation with the critical eye of a master architect. "Perfect," she declared. Marcus looked at the small structure. "Fragile, temporary, beautiful in its impermanence. Do you think it will survive the tide?" he asked. Lily shrugged, a gesture full of the simple wisdom that only children possessed. "Maybe, maybe not." She brushed sand from her small hands. "But if it falls, we build again. That's what we do. Something shifted deep in Marcus's chest. Not pain this time, something else entirely. Something that felt like roots growing where there had only been barren ground. Sophie's voice came soft beside him. You know, Lily is always right about the important things. Marcus turned to look at her. The fading sunlight caught her face, softening the lines of worry that had aged her beyond her years. She looked peaceful, hopeful, alive in a way she hadn't been since David's death. I'm beginning to realize that, he said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the waves inch closer to their creation. The water touched the edge of the shell path, retreated, touched again, testing, approaching, patient as time itself. Lily reached over and placed her small hand on top of Marcus's large one. You're not sad anymore, are you, Mr. Marcus? He looked down at her hand, so small against his, so trusting. For 37 years, Marcus Blackwood had built walls around his heart. He had learned that caring meant losing, that connection meant weakness, that the only way to survive was to need no one. A 6-year-old girl with a bucket of shells had torn all of that down. No, he said, and the smile that crossed his face was real. Perhaps the most real thing he had felt in 15 years. I'm not sad anymore. The sun slipped below the horizon, leaving behind a sky streaked with purple and gold. The three of them remained on the beach, watching the stars emerge one by one, listening to the eternal song of the waves. Marcus Blackwood, the most powerful crime lord on the East Coast, sat on the sand beside a widow and her 6-year-old daughter, guarding a house made of shells. And he understood at last. The point was never to build something permanent. Nothing in this world lasted forever. Empires crumbled, fortunes vanished, people left. The tide always came. The point was knowing that when everything fell apart, you didn't have to rebuild alone. The ocean came for the shell house that night. The waves rolled in under the light of the moon, gentle but inevitable, claiming the little structure piece by piece. By morning, nothing remained but scattered shells and smooth sand, as if the house had never existed at all. But Lily wasn't sad. When they returned the next day, she stood at the water's edge with her red bucket, already collecting new shells, already planning new walls. It's okay, she told Marcus, her dark eyes bright with certainty. Now the ocean has a friend to keep. She reached for his hand. Ready to start again? Marcus looked at Sophie, who smiled and picked up a shell of her own. He thought of David Chen, who had given everything to protect the people he loved. Of Tommy, recovering in a hospital bed but already asking when he could get back to work. Of all the broken pieces of his life that had somehow arranged themselves into something new, something worth protecting. Yes, Marcus said, taking Lily's hand in his. I'm ready. And together, they began again. This story reminds us of the profound truth that kindness costs nothing but can change everything. A little girl who asked a stranger if she could sit beside him. A simple question that became the first crack in walls built over decades of pain and isolation. We learn that strength is not found in power or wealth, or the ability to destroy. True strength lies in the courage to be vulnerable, to reach out, to believe that even the loneliest hearts deserve compassion. Marcus Blackwood was a man who had everything the world considers valuable. Money, influence, fear-inspiring power. Yet he sat on that beach ready to give up because he had nothing that truly mattered. It took a child to remind him that meaning comes not from what we accumulate but from who we choose to care for. David Chen teaches us that ordinary people can become heroes simply by refusing to look away from injustice. He was not a warrior or a spy. He was an accountant, a father, a husband. And he changed the world by choosing truth over safety. The shell house is all of us. We build our lives carefully, piece by piece, hoping they will last. And sometimes the waves come and wash everything away. But the story doesn't end there. It never ends there. We build again. We always build again. And we don't have to do it alone. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us what truly matters in life. We would love to hear from you. How did this story make you feel? Have you ever experienced a moment when a stranger's kindness changed your day, or perhaps your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We read every single one, and your stories inspire us to keep creating content that connects us all. Where are you watching from today? Let us know in the comments. It warms our hearts to see how our little community spans across the world. Thank you for spending these precious minutes with us. Thank you for being part of this journey. We wish you good health, happiness, and peace in your daily life. May you always find kindness in unexpected places and courage to offer it to others. Goodbye for now, and we will see you in our next video. Take care of yourselves and each other. Until we meet again.